Thanks for staying with us this morning. We're at the office of the Attorney General, Derek Schmidt, and we're going to visit with Derek about his new appointment to the National Agricultural Committee for Attorney Generals. I think you said earlier there was 56, even though there's 50 states. So congratulations, you're the Vice President.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm looking forward to serving. I'm going to have the chance this next year to serve as Vice President of our National Association of Attorneys General, bipartisan group, every state Attorney General plus the territorial AGs. So there are 56 of us. And this year our national president is Marty Jackley from South Dakota, and I like to think that the fact we have two Great Plains AGs in the leadership role was relevant to the organization's decision to go ahead and create a new agriculture committee that will focus specifically on some of the legal issues that state attorneys general get involved in that relate to production agriculture. So delighted.
Regional versus national versus, I guess, interstate issues, national waters of the U.S. being probably one of the biggest issues right now.
Yeah, a huge issue, you know, EPA's managed to rename its rule. I guess that's the one thing they learned out of the rulemaking process, was that waters of the U.S. or WOTUS just doesn't sound very good, but it'll always be WOTUS to us. The waters of the U.S. rule is all about extending federal authority over a much larger portion of the North American landmass. And we don't think that it's authority that Congress gave to EPA. EPA disagrees, and that's ultimately what we're going to be fighting about here. Kansas is one of the states that have filed suit in federal court challenging EPA's authority. We're with a group of states, bipartisan group in the Southern District of Georgia. Our goal is to try to get the whole thing put on hold until the legal questions are resolved, and I'm hopeful, but the federal government's always a worthy adversary in a courtroom.
Well, again, that's a national issue. Look at a regional issue like the lesser prairie chicken, which extends from Kansas through Oklahoma and into Texas. Again, it's another opportunity for attorney generals to come together and work together to get that fought.
Absolutely right. I think that's another good example. I think Endangered Species Act regulation is going to be an area that state AGs really come together, again, without respect to partisan lines. For us, the regulation of the lesser prairie chicken, the listing is threatened, has really brought this issue to a head, but of course the lesser prairie chicken is only one of many, many species that are in the listing process. And so it really is a property rights and land use issue, and state control over land use. To the extent government has a role, our view is it ought to be state government, not the federal government. And of course most of that private property regulation is personal, it's private. That's why we call it private property. And so I think you're going to see that sort of thing really discussed actively in this organization.
We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to finish up with Derek, and we're going to talk about some EPA issues pertaining to Kansas. You're watching Kansas Ag Report. Please stay tuned.
This segment brought to you by Kansas Regenerative Medicine Center. Your stem cells, your health, your life. Farmers Insurance, your best protection against the unexpected. Call Agent Dan Key at 785-408-5459. Grass and Grain, online or in the mail, keeping Kansas farmers informed for over 60 years. GrassandGrain.com. Blue River Traders, the finest selection of Western-style furniture for your home. BlueRiverTraders.com.
We're finishing up with Derek Schmidt, our Attorney General, and we're in his office here in Topeka, Kansas. So, Derek, thanks for staying with us. You're a busy guy. I appreciate you squeezing us in today. EPA, you know, we talk about them all the time when it comes to agriculture here in the state of Kansas. Not only are we talking about water, we're also talking about air, and Kansas has multiple coal-fired power plants. We've got an issue coming up, I would imagine, that will trickle down to agriculture.
Well, I think that's right. One of the many new regulations that EPA has put forward here in the waning years of the Obama administration is their new greenhouse gas regulation. We, inside baseball sorts, tend to call it the 111D rule, referring to the specific subset of the Clean Air Act that EPA is claiming authority under. EPA, more euphemistically, likes to call it the Clean Power Plan. But at the end of the day, the issue is to what extent EPA has authority under current law to demand substantial additional regulations of existing power plant emissions, not because of toxins or any other traditionally regulated emissions, but because of greenhouse gas emissions. And we really have crossed a threshold here. It's been determined by the Supreme Court EPA does have conceptually the theory to regulate greenhouse gases, and the fight now is about, well, what does that mean? How may they be regulated? What's EPA have to do? One example, for example, that's a point of friction between ourselves and the feds on this right now. We just won a U.S. Supreme Court case in June where a majority of the court held that EPA has to take cost of its regulations under the Clean Air Act into account. Now here we are just a few weeks later, and the EPA has proposed an even more costly regulation, and in our view has done very little more than pay lip service to the actual cost to consumers. So it's a big deal for rural communities as well as for production agriculture for a couple of reasons. One, because like all of us, folks throughout Kansas are paying electricity rates, and cost matters. Makes a difference between whether you can afford your next family priority or whether part of that money has to go to the utility to pay for the cost of the government regulation. People of Kansas to govern ourselves without unelected agencies in Washington telling us more than they have to how to live our lives. So appreciate the chance to talk about that.
Perfect. Derek, thank you for your time. You're watching Kansas Ag Report, and we'll see you in just a minute.